Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Game of Attention. This week, we'll be focusing on how innovation is reshaping CPG. Today, I'm joined by Sarah and Regina. So, Sarah, it'd be great if you could just introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah. I've been part of the CPG industry for a long time, about 12 years, and working for one of the big players within the market. And my core strengths are around strategy, portfolio management, and innovation within the CPG industry.
Hi, I'm Regina. I'm from Mexico. Also have over 8 years of experience in CPG and then other industry like toys. But yes, and it's been around product development, innovation, and brand management.
Amazing. So the perfect topic for everyone here on the call.
Yeah,
Good to
absolutely.
know. So I think, Regina, I might start off with the first question in your direction. So I'd like to know, how are current trends in customer preferences, like demands for maybe healthier, sustainable options, how are they reshaping innovation strategies in the CPG industry?
I think it is really important as a product developer and like an innovation lead focus on, okay, so these are the new trends, and it's very important to be ahead of those trends and to reshape the market in terms of packaging, what is new out there. Packaging, how can we be more sustainable? What types of materials can we use in order to reduce our footprint, right? That's so important. Also, in terms of ingredients, okay, organic, those types of certifications when we're developing, I don't know, a new formula, and sometimes those products are directed to kids. The organic landscape, how is it working? And also, I think the new technologies, right? How can we reduce the footprint or things that can be damaging for the consumer? Because I think this is a growing trend, and it will keep growing and it will keep evolving. So I think it is really, really important to pay attention to those things. And as marketeers, I feel like you really need to be ahead of those trends in order to be successful and to develop products that, of course, resonate with the consumer and that are appropriate to the demand and the needs that are now in the new society. I don't know what you think, Sarah.
Yeah, no, I feel very strongly about this particular point because I think it's got two layers to it, right? One is the trends and consumer preferences, and then the other is, of course, the evolving needs. And I think there might be the need for everybody is very different. So when you talk about, for example, sustainability, some are more driven towards climate change, some are more driven towards less food waste, right? Some are more driven towards recyclability. And I think that's where one of the consumer trends comes in play, which is hyper customization and really talking to the consumer in a way that it relates to them. And I think that currently in the CPG industry is tied in together, but also I would say a challenge as well, because, how do you tailor make preferences, how to incorporate those preferences into offerings that works and talks to everybody. And then secondly, it's not just about talking or it's not just about positioning. It should also be in the DNA of the brand. It should not just be inherited. And, like with trends, what comes is, okay, the consumers, and we're talking to Gen Z and very soon to Gen Alpha. So, we kind of need to adapt to that. And that's a whole different game altogether, I feel, in terms of trends and consumer preferences, how they're changing, how they're evolving. It's it's quite dynamic.
I totally agree. Like, let's say there's a company that has one brand that is like salad dressings, right? And then you have your traditional salad dressing, and of course, it's when you start creating probably all these other like line extensions, or like how can we keep developing new brands that, of course, fall into that holding brand that is like already has this high equity. Everyone knows that brand. Okay, so then you gain credibility from like the consumer perspective, and that of course helps with all the communication and everything without affecting the DNA of the main brand that might be not organic or anything, but then you have the salad dressing but the organic version, so it's exactly. Like how you start playing with this strategy. I feel like that's the point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really good point, and kind of leads me into my next question. I mean, maybe still thinking about sustainability or kind of key concerns like that, that they are really key concerns for a lot of different customers or consumer groups. But how do you think brands are going about innovating in that space, but also being able to differentiate in the marketplace? And probably, as you said, without losing any DNA or losing themselves, it's kind of how are people managing to innovate efficiently?
Honestly, it's a tough one, right? Because I'm going to go back to my point of sounding more authentic and brand inheriting it as part of its DNA, right? So differentiation, I think innovation is all about making a mark in the market, right? And you're trying to solve a need that exists in the market. So in that process, what you have to really hold on to is authenticity. That needs to be consistent as well. And that's how you kind of differentiate as well, right? Versus any other competition. You don't, I mean, it's a brand's worst nightmare to be a me too, right? You really want to stand out in what you stand for, and your positioning needs to stand out. Likewise, as Regina mentioned, products, they need to cater to a certain demand space that's growing so that it is also inclusive. The brand is inclusive enough, it's talking to everybody, it's relatable. At the same time, it is authentic. So for me, I think looking at what consumer wants and how the market is evolving, I think authenticity is a big, it's within the space. I don't know, Regina, what do you think?
Yeah, I think authenticity is key. And of course, it's understanding from a marketing perspective, like what's the DNA of your brand? Like, where do you stand? Understanding the landscape, what's possible to change from like a capability perspective as well, right? But like I would say the most important thing is really understanding the consumer, because the consumer will give us the insight of what really matters, right? For example, we can say, yeah, we're gonna invest in reducing, I'm gonna throw an idea, I don't know, in reducing plastic in this packaging, and then you go to the consumer, and of course it will help sustain like
Yeah.
sustainability and everything, and it will add to the corporate strategy, of course. But then you go to the consumer and they're like, I really don't care. Like, actually, I need plastic because that's necessary for my packaging
Yeah.
to work. And then you already invested in all those things, which of course you have the capability to do from like a company perspective, which is great. But then it is so important to understand the consumer and understand the insights so that you can deliver something that is a win-win strategy, right? So you have like this sustainability, but then you also are you're addressing the consumer needs in the best possible way, and then you add value. So when you add value and when you have like these two levers, it's like it's magic, because then you're really addressing both in the best possible way, and it really adds value. And I feel like when you differentiate yourself from the others in the landscape is when you add value. So I would say that it's important.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a really a good point. I kind of wrote down a few things. I really like that kind of, it's like a win-win strategy, but for authenticity. So it's kind of like if you can keep that authentic brand DNA or brand identity, but also I guess not buckle into all the consumer needs, because as you said, they kind of, some things can kind of go and come as quickly as they rise their heads, but you really need to make the best decisions for everyone, not just one consumer or one segment of your audience, but making sure that as a business and as a company you can make sure you can keep going and delivering the best products and markets. So really good point. I guess kind of touching on that point, so you kind of mentioned things around marrying kind of either the trends or the insights. It kind of leads quite nicely into thinking about your market research and how you gather your insight. So how can market research and customer insights be used as a guide for innovation and the innovation process? And then the second part of the question would be, how do you translate those insights into real world product innovation that actually resonate with consumers? So how do you guys go about that?
Yeah, I think it's adding to what I was saying before, that it's so important. I feel like one of the key departments in an organization is consumer insights, because as a consumer-centric company, or like, of course CPG is focused on the consumer, right? So it's very consumer-centric, and we need to like address the needs and how to do it in a better way than the others out there, right? So it's really important to understand from like a consumer research perspective, like what really drives the interest in a product, or like what's really important to them, and what does make an impact to the consumer, right? So that way the innovation is less, it's translated in, okay, so they really care about reducing footprint, or they really care about having, I don't know, more quality in food instead of more quantity. I don't know. I'm just throwing ideas, right? So in terms of like product itself, formulas, ingredients. Okay, so how can we really make that investment into that situation that really matters to the consumer, instead of just like throwing everything out and then the effort just like gets pulverized, instead of like making one thing maybe like really great, so that really drives the consumer, like, yeah, the consumer impact. So Sarah, I don't know, like, you being the expert in innovation, I would love to hear you.
Yeah, no, I think data, I mean, insights and consumer research is all about data, right? And data, the sources of data, the way it's growing, the accessibility of data, it's just amazing. It's evolving by the day. And I think whoever gets their hands on good data set and is able to do or churn out good analytics out of it, and then translate them into a high impact space, is something that works out, especially in case of innovations as well, right? Because what we're looking at, absolutely what Regina said, there's observations and there is insights that you gather. And I think what happens is that database, if a company tends to kind of invest within a database, then all of that gets stored and you kind of have, quite a huge amount of, like data there to kind of analyze and then figure out what the impact is going to be. The other thing that I would mention here is, again, sometimes you tend to get distracted by fads or trends, right? Because they kind of skew the data, right? Because sometimes you have to put your sense, like, yes, data is one thing, but then you, like, for example, I just give the example of pandemic. I mean, the way categories and industries adopted to that kind of dynamic, that does not exist anymore. And that kind of, and I wouldn't say it's a fad. I mean, it was just a very difficult time period, but things like that, they emerge, but then they also die down. So I think it's important to kind of realize what is a fad out of the data, right? What's a fad? What's a short-term trend? What's a long-term trend? Because at the end of the day, we're businesses, we're here to make money as well, right? So where is the money? Because we are going to invest resources, yes, something that is indicative out of data, but we will invest resources to kind of enter that space and kind of be more competitive. So we got to make it work for both the consumers and for the business. So I think it kind of flows in together, right? Because sometimes you just look at data from one aspect, but you don't apply another lens, which is, okay, how am I going to use this to my benefit? And especially for my long-term benefit, is it really going to impact the business as well? While I cater to consumers' needs, that's of course first and forefront of everything. So yeah, that's what I feel. I think it's important, very important topic, though.
Yeah, 100%.
No, definitely. And I kind of a question that just popped into my head, but I think it's really interesting the points that you're raising around this data set or data bank that you have. Is it fair to say that we're now seeing a shift into those consistent testing points of doing things like not so much like sentiment tracking and listening, but those wider kind of maybe more macro, keeping a pulse on those elements to maybe identify what are those trends that are peaks versus consistent cultural change, probably. Have you guys seen a shift in your experience of how you're testing as well?
I think since the pandemic, the industry has evolved massively, right? And when I say, like, of course, going through the trends and the sentiment analysis, and of course how you do research, etc., that has also evolved, right? And I think that's where the role of probably AI comes in the most, because sometimes you are doing that analysis keeping certain things in mind, but it also kind of gives you a forward looking perspective and kind of putting in that backward lens to it as well. So for certain brands, I would say it's important to keep a check on both, right? Short term and long term as well. It's not like you have to choose either or, because in some instances, that short term is where the gain is going to come in from. And if you don't do that, you might be irrelevant, and you'll be thrown out of the market. So I think it's tough, and that is how the research is also evolving.
Like, I feel like it is important to have both, right? Ever since I start working, it's like, okay, first you understand the macro environment of like what's going on, what's happening. There's all these companies that have these future forecasts that are the trends coming in the next 3 to 5 years are this and that, depending on the industry, the consumers, how like they are entering the landscape that you play on, and everything. So I feel like understanding all of that is so important, because of course it gives you like a direction on where to go, right? But at the same time, you also are playing in the present, where it's like the product
Yeah.
that you have today. So it's so important to have all of them covered, because you're developing for the future but also addressing the present, right? So I feel like having a good balance, it's really important to dedicate some like specific time during the year to really understand the future and the impact, to develop plans. It's really important, but also dedicate some time for the present and understanding like what's working right now. What can we change in terms of communication? Okay, the product is out there already, but maybe the communication is not really resonating with the consumer. So how can we make like that change, that it's easy to change, right? It's like immediate change in a campaign, or the way we communicate the
Mhm.
values or the benefits of the
Yeah.
product. And so yeah, I feel like it's so important to have all of them covered at the same time.
Yeah.
It's hard because it's a lot of work, but I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
definitely. No, and that's really insightful. I think that's so interesting. I think sometimes, I think especially when we kind of look around strategies, you always think is it long term or is it short term, but in reality of how you guys work, it's you have to do a bit of everything and adapt
Yes.
accordingly. So that's really interesting. Looking at innovation in CPG, what are the biggest barriers that you guys are seeing, and how do you think companies can overcome these challenges, especially when it's coming to stay ahead of competition?
Of course. Okay, I think some barriers for innovation and having good innovation in general, in terms of formulas, product, packaging, is one, costs. Like when you are the first one, of course it's preemptive, and so like the prices or the costs are like so high. You need to have like a very good portfolio of brands that can help support the investment that you're gonna make on like a new product that might be very expensive, right? I think technologies and consumer adoption. Consumer adoption, because sometimes you might be very, very innovative, but like the consumer adoption might take time,
Yeah.
right? So I think
Too
that's
innovative,
important.
maybe sometimes.
Yeah. So you need to measure how long is it going to take for consumers to adapt to these new product, this new packaging. Maybe it's really disruptive. So you have to, I feel like you need to be really careful on when you launch something. Maybe consumer is used to have, I don't know, seeing ketchup in, like, let's say water in bottles. And then, they launched it in a little pack, like a little box.
Yeah.
That's really disruptive. It might work, it might not, but you really need to test to start with, and you really need to measure the consumer adoption, the technologies that you're going to need in order to get there, the costs. So I feel like, of course, how to address that is again, consumer insights is so important. Testing, negotiations, right, with your suppliers. So if you negotiate and like within time and give them, I don't know, more business in terms of other categories, might help. Strong portfolio of brands, as I mentioned, so that you can start with one and offset the loss with other really strong brands. So I think, I mean, there are many barriers, but I feel like some of those are really important to address, and it's something that you can actually see and feel in CPG industries. I don't know what you what do you want to add, Sarah?
Yeah, I think for me, the three big barriers are speed, agility, and differentiation in a mix. And I think, part of it you touched upon as well. And I think why? Because in CPG, again, as the name suggests, I think it's fast moving. So how you adopt trends, how you get into the right spaces quickly matters, right? And I think that almost, of course, as you mentioned, that sometimes comes at a cost. It sometimes comes at a compromise within the mix, within one of the P's that you're looking at. So, how to balance the two, right? Because I want to get in the space quickly, but I also want to get into the space with the right mix and with the right cost and kind of also benefit the business. So I want it all. So, how do you do that? Because with innovation, that's of course, and when you say that you want to enter a space, you want to enter it for a long time, and you don't just want to go in and come out. And that's usually not the case. I'm not saying it can't happen at all, but that's usually not the case. You're trying to build a strategy and a portfolio, and you're trying to get the most out of it, so you have to capitalize it at the right time. And then hence I think speed, agility becomes extremely important. And the last bit, I think, is differentiation. Your example, Regina, was brilliant because, you're want to be the disruptor in the market, but you don't want to be so different that people like, "Oh, okay, what's going on? What
You
what are
don't
you asking
understand
me to do?
totally.
Yeah, I don't want to touch this." And that sometimes it's, like we call it over engineering the mix, and sometimes marketeers become too confident, and for all the right reasons, right? Because you want to be the disruptor, you want to be the differentiator, but sometimes it's a bit too much. So, where do you draw that line? Because you don't want to be missed out in a huge crowd either. You want to be heard, you want to be seen, you want to be bought, you want to be used. But how do you define that fine line of, yes, I'm in the right space, I'm providing the right solution, but at the same time I'm different, have a different set of benefits to offer. So I think that for me is extremely challenging. Yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really, really challenging how to find the right mix of being disruptive, but not too much, and doing it the right way and the
yeah,
best possible way in economic value for the company, but like to add value with the consumer. But it's really fun, I
yeah.
would say too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's fun.
No, amazing. I think
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap up there, guys. I think that's all the time that we have. But thank you
Okay.
so much for joining us. I think we hit on some really interesting stuff. Of there is a lot of challenges and there's a lot of barriers to innovation, but it seems like it is absolutely necessary for any kind of success. Either, as you said, those short-term gains of maybe pivoting and making something that's in market even more successful or communicated better, or as you said, kind of having that what's coming in 3 years or 5 years to make sure that you're on trend to be
Yeah.
disruptive enough but not too disruptive. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Kate. And
Yeah.
thank you, Sarah.
Oh no, thank you. This was fun.